The technology was developed and extended by a global community of users and scientists working together. And the three special people who had a real role to play. One was John Greenfield, a bank agriculturist. The other was Paul Truong, who's an Australian scientist. And the other was the King of Thailand. So those of you who don't know anything about vetiver grass, I thought I'd let a farmer from Ecuador tell you about it. And it's in Spanish, but there are English subtitles.
Soy de origen europeo y vivo aquí en el norte de Ecuador desde 1990. Tengo una pequeña finca de 15 hectáreas y desde el inicio me dediqué a la restauración ecológica. Es decir, al momento de la compra, encontré un terreno pelado, totalmente esterilizado, empobrecido, y durante todo este tiempo he logrado restaurar, regenerar vegetación, restablecer biodiversidad. Hoy en este momento tengo un bosque en formación. En los países o en las regiones con una geografía muy accidentada, es decir, con muchas pendientes, la erosión es un gran problema. Es decir, el desgaste del terreno por la lluvia, por el viento, lleva la capa fértil. Tenemos a la disposición una planta, una gramínea, que se llama Vetiver, que es de origen de Asia, y nos sirve para frenar la erosión de la siguiente manera. Es una planta estéril, no produce semillas, entonces podemos plantarla en líneas en contorno, no se va a destruir como plaga, lo tenemos ahí, se engorda, se hace una línea más gruesa, plantamos en una loma en diferentes partes, a una distancia, para frenar la erosión. Además, lo bueno es que detrás de cada barrera se acumula la hojarasca y el sedimento. Vetiver tiene la característica que tiene raíces que van verticalmente adentro, 3, 4, hasta 4 metros y medio adentro. Lo que es muy interesante porque la planta es capaz de absorber los minerales del horizonte C o D, que es muy profundo, es capaz de subir estos minerales, poner en la hoja y después, una vez que la hoja cae o se la corta, es un aporte de minerales al suelo. En el contorno se forman terrazas naturales sin la necesidad de construir estas terrazas. Este proceso se llama formación lenta de terrazas. Y con el tiempo en el paisaje tenemos así un perfil ondulado. Yo recomiendo a todas las personas que quieren restaurar su terreno, que quieren empezar de cero, yo recomiendo fuertemente el uso de vetiver, obviamente en zonas tropicales y subtropicales.
Okay, so that shows the basics of vetiver. The climate change accelerates land and water-related problems in a big way. And these on the left-hand side are some of the problems which we're facing with soil and water and land. And the Vetiver Grass Technology can mitigate many of these problems, or totally or partially. It'll reduce soil losses, say, by 90%. It can increase shear strength of soil by 40%. It can remove excess chemicals from the soil. Soil moisture improvement can improve up to by 40%, and that often extends the wilting point of a plant by maybe up to 10 days in a drought period. Reduces rainfall runoff, be a dead-end trap crop for some insects, and it's a pioneer plant for other species if we use it in a particular way. And down the bottom here, we're using it a lot now for improving water quality, and it also recharges groundwater. So it can do an awful lot of things if it is designed and used in the right way. The plant itself, there are two major species of importance. One is Zizinoides, Chrysopodon zizinoides, the Indian variety, and nigritanus from Africa. It's a unique, fast-growing plant. It's an extremely complex plant. For example, it can attract stem borer moth for maize and rice. It attracts it as a preferable plant. Once the eggs are laid on that leaf, it then kills the larvae. It's very clever. It's drought tolerant, it's highly versatile, and it has some important morphological features like erect and stiff stems, extraordinary root system, and it creates thick and dense hedges. You'll see in this presentation a few photographs of some of the key people who were involved in this work over the years. One was PKU, the rubber research scientist in Malaysia, who did some very important seminal work on vetiver, and this just shows a longitudinal section through a vetiver hedgerow, because that's normally how it's planted, and it shows the extraordinary root system underneath. These roots, for the first meter, will look a bit like this, and then they can go on up to 4 or 5 meters deep. Here's a cross-section of a vetiver hedgerow, and you can see this induced terracing which takes place. Instead of having to build something. Those of you who don't know anything about vetiver grass, I thought I'd let a farmer from Ecuador tell you about it. And it's in Spanish, but there are English subtitles.
Soy de origen europeo y vivo aquí en el norte de Ecuador desde 1990. Tengo una pequeña finca de 15 hectáreas y desde el inicio me dediqué a la restauración ecológica. Es decir, al momento de la compra, encontré un terreno pelado, totalmente esterilizado, empobrecido, y durante todo este tiempo he logrado restaurar, regenerar vegetación, restablecer biodiversidad. Hoy en este momento tengo un bosque en formación. En los países o en las regiones con una geografía muy accidentada, es decir, con muchas pendientes, la erosión es un gran problema. Es decir, el desgaste del terreno por la lluvia, por el viento, lleva la capa fértil. Tenemos a la disposición una planta, una gramínea, que se llama Vetiver, que es de origen de Asia, y nos sirve para frenar la erosión de la siguiente manera. Es una planta estéril, no produce semillas, entonces podemos plantarla en líneas en contorno, no se va a destruir como plaga, lo tenemos ahí, se engorda, se hace una línea más gruesa, plantamos en una loma en diferentes partes, a una distancia, para frenar la erosión. Además, lo bueno es que detrás de cada barrera se acumula la hojarasca y el sedimento. Vetiver tiene la característica que tiene raíces que van verticalmente adentro, 3, 4, hasta 4 metros y medio adentro. Lo que es muy interesante porque la planta es capaz de absorber los minerales del horizonte C o D, que es muy profundo, es capaz de subir estos minerales, poner en la hoja y después, una vez que la hoja cae o se la corta, es un aporte de minerales al suelo. En el contorno se forman terrazas naturales sin la necesidad de construir estas terrazas. Este proceso se llama formación lenta de terrazas. Y con el tiempo en el paisaje tenemos así un perfil ondulado. Yo recomiendo a todas las personas que quieren restaurar su terreno, que quieren empezar de cero, yo recomiendo fuertemente el uso de vetiver, obviamente en zonas tropicales y subtropicales.
Okay, so that shows the basics of vetiver. The climate change accelerates land and water-related problems in a big way. And these on the left-hand side are some of the problems which we're facing with soil and water and land. And the Vetiver Grass Technology can mitigate many of these problems, or totally or partially. It'll reduce soil losses, say, by 90%. It can increase shear strength of soil by 40%. It can remove excess chemicals from the soil. Soil moisture improvement can improve up to by 40%, and that often extends the wilting point of a plant by maybe up to 10 days in a drought period. Reduces rainfall runoff, be a dead-end trap crop for some plant, for some insects, and it's a pioneer plant for other species if we use it in a particular way. And down the bottom here, we're using it a lot now for improving water quality, and it also recharges groundwater. So it can do an awful lot of things if it is designed and used in the right way. The plant itself, there are two major species of importance. One is Zizinoides, Chrysopodum zizinoides, the Indian variety, and Nigritanus from Africa. It's a unique, fast-growing plant. It's an extremely complex plant. For example, it can attract stem borer moth for maize and rice. It attracts it as a preferable plant. Once the eggs are laid on that leaf, it then kills the larvae. It's very clever. It's drought tolerant, it's highly versatile, and it has some important morphological features like erect and stiff stems, extraordinary root system, and it creates thick and dense hedges. You'll see in this presentation a few photographs of some of the key people who were involved in this work over the years. One was P.K. Yoon, the rubber research scientist in Malaysia, who did some very important seminal work on vetiver, and this just shows a longitudinal section through a vetiver hedgerow, because that's normally how it's planted, and it shows the extraordinary root system underneath. These roots, for the first meter, will look a bit like this, and then they can go on up to 4 or 5 meters deep. Here's a cross-section of a vetiver hedgerow, and you can see this induced terracing which takes place. Instead of having to build something, construct a terrace, this does it automatically in a biological way. Vetiver is sterile, so it's non-invasive, and we have to propagate it in nurseries, and a lot of small farmers are involved in propagation. They've changed their lives. They make a lot of money out of it when they do it. This was in Madagascar, this was in India, and in China, Feng Ziyuan, who's a leader of vetiver technology in China. He has a business there, and he has a 20-hectare nursery. Now, a little bit about the history. It's been around. It's a very ancient plant, and it's been known in history since about 3000 BC. And it was traditionally used for field demarcation. The aromatic oil industry has used it. It's an aromatic plant. And it's been used for forage and other things like that. Then in the 1930s, the British Colonial Service realized there was serious problems with erosion, so they introduced vegetative hedges, and some of it was vetiver, and this was in St. Vincent in the West Indies. And after the war, the engineered conservation structures became the vogue, engineered terraces, contour bunds, and so on. And these were expensive. They actually disposed water off the land, which should have been held on the land, and soil health was generally ignored. I was posted to India in 1982, and we had 4 World Bank watershed projects there, mainly on the black vertisols of central India, which huge in extent, hundreds of millions of acres, and they're very difficult to manage. They swell, they crack, and they're difficult to work, but they're very fertile. And the convention was to use these conservation bunds to stop erosion. Often it did the exact opposite. They would break and cause tremendous problems. At that time, John Greenfield came to India to work with us, and he told me better use vetiver grass. So I sent him off to Fiji, and he came back with these three photographs, which impressed me and started the whole thing off. One was this photograph showing a 1.5 meter induced terrace built over 30 years, and also used as riverbank stabilization and protection, and also for gully rehabilitation. So we got started in India with these vetiver grass hedges, and as you see there on the contour, crops look pretty good. Of course, after a while, we found that Indian farmers had been using it anyway for many years as perimeter hedgerows around their fields. The second phase was when I went back to Washington and reorganization, and I was put in charge of the Asia Ag Technical Division. So I took the opportunity to get this technology out through many bank projects in the region. Jim Smyle joined me as a young man then, and he set up and did a newsletter. We had publications, and we got research going in a number of countries. John Greenfield produced a fantastic little book, which has been translated into probably 20 languages now. And the US Research Council did a scientific audit of vetiver and gave it a thumbs up. We focused mainly on soil and water conservation. We did it through, this was a case here in Ethiopia where an NGO, following Jim Smyle's visit to Ethiopia, where he gave a lecture, they started a vetiver program in the West, and today there are 30,000 hectares at least under the system. Yield increases have been pretty good, soil loss reduction, 18 tons down to 3 tons a hectare, and so on. It's also improved groundwater. And perennial flow of springs have improved tremendously in that area, and also wetlands have become wet again. We also need to conserve soil and moisture on flat lands, and this was work done here in Australia on the Darling Downs. It was very effective. It's all been backed by research here with some hydraulic flumes, testing vetiver, and in the end of last year, we got a little program going on in Zimbabwe. Vetiver is sterile, so it's non-invasive, and we have to propagate it in nurseries, and it's a lot of small farmers are involved in propagation. They've changed their lives. They make a lot of money out of it when they do it. This was in Madagascar, this was in India. And in China, Feng Ziyuan, who's a leader of vetiver technology in China, he has a business there, and he has a 20-hectare nursery. Now, a little bit about the history. It's been around. It's a very ancient plant, and it's been known in history since about 3000 BC. But and it was traditionally used for field demarcation. The aromatic oil industry has used it. It's an aromatic plant, and it's been used for forage and other things like that. Then in the 1930s, the British Colonial Service realized there was serious problems with erosion, so they introduced vegetative hedges, and some of it was vetiver, and this was in St. Vincent in the West Indies. And after the war, the engineered conservation structures became the vogue, engineered terraces, contour bunds, and so on. And these were expensive. They actually disposed water off the land, which should have been held on the land, and soil health was generally ignored. I was posted to India in 1982, and we had 4 World Bank watershed projects there, mainly on the black vertisols of central India, which are huge in extent, hundreds of millions of acres. And they're very difficult to manage. They swell, they crack, and they're difficult to work, but they're very fertile. And the convention was to use these conservation bunds to stop erosion. Often it did the exact opposite. They would break and cause tremendous problems. At that time, John Greenfield came to India to work with us, and he told me better use vetiver grass. So I sent him off to Fiji, and he came back with these 3 photographs, which impressed me and started the whole thing off. One was this photograph showing a 1.5 meter induced terrace built over 30 years, and also used as riverbank stabilization and protection, and also for gully rehabilitation. So we got started in India with these vetiver grass hedges, and as you see there on the contour, crops look pretty good. Of course, after a while, we found that Indian farmers had been using it anyway for many years as perimeter hedgerows around their fields. The second phase was when I went back to Washington and reorganization, and I was put in charge of the Asia Ag Technical Division. So I took the opportunity to get this technology out through many bank projects in the region. Jim Smyle joined me as a young man then, and he set up and did a newsletter. We had publications, and we got research going in a number of countries. John Greenfield produced a fantastic little book, which has been translated into probably 20 languages now, and the US Research Council did a scientific audit of vetiver and gave it a thumbs up. We focused mainly on soil and water conservation. We did it through, this was a case here in Ethiopia where an NGO, following Jim Smyle's visit to Ethiopia, where he gave a lecture, they started a vetiver program in the West, and today there are 30,000 hectares at least under the system. Yield increases have been pretty good, soil loss reduction, 18 tons down to 3 tons a hectare, and so on. It's also improved groundwater. And perennial flow of springs have improved tremendously in that area, and also wetlands have become wet again. We also need to conserve soil and moisture on flat lands, and this was work done here in Australia on the Darling Downs. It was very effective. It's all been backed by research here with some hydraulic flumes, testing vetiver. And in the end of last year, we got a little program going on in Zimbabwe. Eco-reforestation is very important. And this was a case in China where there was what's called the red desert. Nothing would grow there. They tested some vetiver there, which I introduced in 1988. And this area here was first planted with vetiver, and then they came in with trees afterwards, and it's been very successful. The key here was the vetiver hedgerows kept the rainfall there, the water there, and created microclimate for the trees to prosper. The third phase we brought the bioengineering for engineered slopes and extreme sites. At that time also we set up the Vetiver Network in 1995. We managed to grab some money. We started publishing hard copy newsletters. The King of Thailand was heavily involved in some of this, and he supported Vetiver conferences. And we set up a website. Bioengineering, as I said, was a key aspect. We kept on going with research. A lot of other countries got involved in research. We didn't pay for much of it, they did. And then we had some DNA analysis in 2000, which confirmed that most of the vetiver being grown was sterile and non-invasive. Some of the engineering work we did, you can use it here for rural roads in the Solomon Islands. In the Congo, we have this tremendous problem with urban gullying, and this was a community effort at rehabbing the gullying. This was a contracted effort. These two guys were involved, and this is what is being done under a new map project by the bank in Nigeria now. Then we can also use it for stabilizing coastal areas. This was a 2-kilometer coastal rehab work done by Paula Leo. She has a very big engineering company in Brazil. And in the Vietnam, Paul Truong, who's our technical director of the Vetiver Network, along with Tran Tan Van, brought Vetiver into the Ho Chi Minh Highway, which has replaced the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And there's 2,000 kilometers there, not all of Vetiver, but in the critical areas Vetiver was used. And interestingly here, 9 years later, the local species are now coming in. Last year in Myanmar, Teen Moore planted 3 million plants here in this area on a hilltop airport in Myanmar. You see the pictures here. And Robinson Vanno, who's an assistant director of the Vetiver Network, has been stabilizing these building sites in the Solomon Islands. This is actually a correction center. What a place to be in prison, eh? Then landslides are becoming a major problem with the extreme rainfall events which are occurring now. And so vetiver hedgerows are being used here to stabilize. This is a landslide in Brazil, completely stabilized in 4 years. This is in Madagascar, where you see this all over the country, and Vetiver's done a great job in stabilizing that. The phase 4 was the third leg of the Vetiver system, as it's called, was phytoremediation for the remediation of polluted water. And this was developed by Paul Truong in Australia, and it was a major and a very important application. It's got a lot of importance for the future as well. And during this period between 2000 and about today, Truong developed a computer model for small-scale treatment of polluted water, pest control applications for maize and stem borer and rice stem borer. It's been used social applications for handicraft thatching, common community eco restoration work. Our website has extended, and last year we had 600,000 visits. We have new publications, technical manuals, they're all downloadable, they're free. We set up a certification system to certify competent VGT operators, and the Thais developed a tracking system which sort of worked, but we're not that happy with it. So now we're switching over to iNaturalist, which makes a great platform for locating where vetiver is being planted. During this period, we've increased the involvement of the private sector on all continents. In fact, they've been the drivers in many ways because they're seeing they can make money out of this now. So they're using it for bioengineering, phytoremediation, and these other aspects. NGO involvement. We've got TVNI Facebook page with 30, and I think 41 other Facebook pages have been developed. And we have a philosophy of 1,000 flowers blooming. So I wanted to tell you a bit about this phyto utilization. It's very important. And here is a short video from the US, where it's being done by a company called Leachate Management Services, and Eric Weidinger is the technical boss there.
In 2010, a landfill in Mississippi was looking for an innovative way to manage its leachate on site. So they hired an environmental engineering firm that had experience with phytoremediation and using hybrid poplar trees to consume wastewater. After exploring options, the firm proposed a new type of system that would use the leachate to irrigate fields of vetiver on top of the landfill. Vetiver was a perfect choice because it has high water demand and high tolerance to contaminants. They consulted with world vetiver expert Dr. Paul Trung during the design process, and a year later installed a 3-acre system for about 1.2 hectares, using about 75,000 vetiver plants. The project was deemed the first of its kind in the US and ended up winning a National Engineering Award. The system is still in operation and the plants are growing well. Since it started, Vetiver has consumed more than 8.3 million gallons and has helped the facility avoid over $1 million in off-site disposal costs. Now, instead of hauling the leachate off-site or treating it through some expensive process, it is collected and pumped through our fully automated filtration and distribution system to the top of the landfill, where it irrigates rows of specially selected plants, like vetiver, that have a very high water demand and ability to thrive in harsh conditions. The liquid is distributed in the field through a slow drip irrigation system over a large area. After all of the design and permitting steps are completed, the system is ready for installation. Vetiver slips are delivered to the site. We are fortunate to have multiple suppliers based in the US who we can rely on to provide high-quality plants as needed. We plant the vetiver in double rows based on our site-specific design of the irrigation system and to help with maintenance. A key to any vetiver project is making sure that they are planted correctly and that they get plenty of fresh water to start. Then, 3 months later, the field should be looking good and the leachate can be introduced. In addition to the first Mississippi project, our employees have been involved with the installation of 8 more Vetiver systems, including 3 in Mexico.
Okay, so that is being used. It's got a lot of potential in the US and in many other countries. Some of the early work by Truong in Australia. This was the tertiary treatment of sewage from a small town sewage treatment plant, and you can see the sort of results we're getting. The CODs were reduced from 738 down to 10, total nitrogen from 96 to 7.6. All the EPA standards were met. On a rather smaller scale, when after the tsunami in Banda Aceh in Indonesia, they used vetiver here for septic system treatment. Here's another way of using it. It was in Australia. We can even float it on pontoons to clean up effluent lagoons, piggery effluent lagoons. And this is very interesting work done by in China, where they're floating vetiver on this tertiary effluent pond from a small town. And instead of using 2 or 3 hectares of land, or maybe even more, they can use a much smaller space. Just shows you the versatility of this plant. And finally, on pollution control, this was in Haiti, where these pit latrines, they couldn't stabilize the sides of the latrines, so they planted vetiver all around it. It worked out beautifully. It also cleans the leachate as it comes off the bottom, and it provides privacy. With the slab they put on the top, I think the total cost was about $20. On the social side, Oswald Luque from Venezuela and others have done a tremendous job in introducing vetiver as a handicraft, and in Venezuela, for example, there are 25 women cooperatives who are using vetiver and making quite good money out of it. It's also used by inmates as an inmate program in St. Vincent jail, and it's changed the lives of those people there too, which is nice to think. Okay, now there are a lot of business opportunities for vetiver nowadays, for plant supply material, contract applications for consulting services, quality thatch, handicrafts, aromatic oil, biomass production, sales for forage and energy. Vetiver can, under good conditions, can produce over 100 tons of biomass per hectare. It's a very, very productive plant. And just for interest, this is a very large planting by my Chinese friends for a hydroelectric scheme. He's done a lot of that. You can see it on this side and on that side of the plant over there. Then the current status of where we are today, we have a multi-purpose technology, cross-sector applications, particularly suitable for rural communities with limited resources. It's proven and cost-effective, supported by research, acceptable to most users, although we had trouble getting conservation engineers to accept it. We can go into that later if necessary. And it's a potential tool for many global challenges, as I hope I've shown you. This is an interesting picture behind here because it's got, it was 250 kilometers of vetiver hedgerow on this commercial farm in Ethiopia. Social media platforms have become very important, and it really is a wonderful way of getting information out. It gets people thinking, it gets them talking to each other, and they share a lot of information. We could not have done it in any other way. These social media platforms, as an example, this is one which started 2 years ago in Vietnam by this young man who works for an agricultural company in Hanoi. He's committed to vetiver, very interested in it. He set up a website, a Facebook page, 3,000 members. There's a lot of activity going on, and they're really embedding it into the farm system now. They're using it for mulch, they're using it for soil protection, rainfall protection, and so on. Sorry, I've got something gone wrong here. What is it? Put it in my pocket. They've also, interestingly enough, they're actually planting vetiver in the same hole as a fruit tree. And they're getting some rather good results, improved growth and so on. And then there's the need and the response. The need is for low-cost and effective technologies with potential for rapid upscaling and autonomous adoption by communities and the poor. The response, the Vetiver Grass Technology is positioned for this if people want to use it. Plant material is easily available. It's effective at micro and large scale. It's acceptable to a broad range of stakeholders. And there are resource people available for support and training of trainers. It can be used as consultants to help design development projects. So I think I have 25 minutes. I've done my bit. I'm going to pass it over to Jim now, and then later we can have some discussion. Thank you. How do I get out?
There you go.
You there, Jim?
Yes, I'm here. Let me pull up my presentation. There we go. Come on. There. Okay, well, I think, thank you, Dick. And Dick's done a really good job, I think, of giving you an overview of Vetiver technology, its history, and its development. And I hope he has also convinced you that it's got some potential that merits consideration and further thinking. So let me go back to our title of our presentation here about a role that social media might play to shorten the development and adaptation and innovation cycles around technologies. And, obviously our interest is in going to scale, but I think in general, what we've learned about where social media can be effective is, number one, it's very effective at reaching motivated end users. And who I would call a motivated end user is someone who's got a problem, they're looking for a solution. And they, in the case of Vetiver, found Vetiver and got their hands on some plants and got to work with it. And in doing that, they not only sort of proved the concept and developed it further, but they also, as this example of the Vetiver latrine in Haiti, they found all these other innovations that that it could be used for. So maybe not wholly new uses, but interesting ways to apply these uses. And as those motivated end users sort of expand our range of applications and deepen the innovation, they create a positive feedback loop where when they're sharing that through social media, it gets other people interested, other motivated end users. And in result, you get this sort of self-scaling process going on amongst the motivated end users. And this proof of concept, I think, is quite important. At least, when we're talking about Vetiver, it really has. It's being used in over 100 countries. It's being used, as Dick already mentioned, at lots of different scales. But it's across climates, it's across soil types, it's across cultures, it's across systems, and so it's shown it to be a very robust technology that I don't think you would have had any, you couldn't have done that intentionally utilizing existing sort of research and development facilities. So that was, that's something I think social media can get you to that you're not going to get through the normal research systems. But there's a limit to that scaling. The scaling has been modest, and when I say modest, I'm still talking about a pretty remarkable spread across the globe. But by the same token, it's broad and it's not deep. And when I say it's not deep, I mean it's a small community of users relative to what the need is and what the potential is. And so to get beyond that modest scaling, we are very clear that you need institutional platforms in order to do that. So you can't simply substitute for institutions with social media. But if the institutions are going to be effective, it's a question of how and from who do the institutions learn. And in our experience, the backward learning linkages tend to be weak or missing. And when I say backward learning linkages, I'm talking about learning from the field, learning from experience, paying attention to what's out there. That is not, in general, a strong capacity or characteristic. And just to give you one example of that, Dick already mentioned the Ethiopia case, where there are now literally tens of thousands of farmers and tens of thousands of hectares of land being protected by vetiver grass hedges, starting 30 years ago by a German NGO, Mensch für Mensch. So the farmer preference is clear. And because of the scale of it and the duration, obviously Ethiopian researchers and technical people have gotten interested. And there has been research done by them proving and demonstrating that the vetiver for soil and moisture conservation works as good or better than the hard structures at a fraction of the cost. and clearly more sustainable. 1/10 the current cost for maintenance, and that has always been a problem with structural approaches is maintenance. Plus, there are the additional benefits that don't accrue from structural approaches, and these multiple benefits are important as well. Dick's named quite a few of them. So the government there is aware of this technology, but yet it has continued to support the use of expensive structures for soil and moisture conservation. Why does it do that? Well, maybe we'll get into that a little bit more in the question and answer period, but part of it is that institutions, the rule of rote, it's hard to overcome inertia, institutional inertia. But then there's also, these more expensive systems are in place. To put a not too fine a point on it, there's a lot of self-dealing going on around these programs, and people hate to see it displaced. Managed activity with lots of contracts and contractors. And we also see that World Bank and other agencies in Ethiopia continue to support and finance these hard structures. So there's clearly a disconnect in the learning there. Just another example of the disconnect is, we looked at the number of technical publications and references over time. During these sort of different periods and for the different application areas for vetiver, and it's pretty clear that you see that the academic and technical community have been increasingly paying attention to what's going on in all of these different areas. But there's a real lag in the international institutional architecture. The international research and technical assistance agencies, and here I'm referring to CGIAR, I'm referring to FAO, and others. Very little relative to the academic and technical literature, and I hasten to point out that what's in the academic and technical literature is not all theoretical and research station, but it's, as in the case of Ethiopia, people going out because there's use of it on the ground, and they want to see what's its advantages, disadvantages, and how it works. And so today there's quite a bit of literature out there, and I just thought, as an interesting comparison, on agricultural productivity, which is mostly soil and moisture conservation sorts of things, and in agriculture, 7,860 references or publications on vetiver in this period from 2014 to 2021. That compares to about 35,000, just over 35,000 references to soil conservation technologies and soil moisture conservation technologies. So at least, going through my methodology, which is looking at Google Scholar, ResearchGate, Academia, .edu, fully almost over 20% of the references in soil conservation included vetiver, but yet very little in the international research and technical assistance agencies and the multilateral development agencies. So just pointing out that there's this disconnect between what's happening on the field and what the knowledge is and what the application is. So where, social media was really key in building a lot of this up and getting us to where we are today. And what we see is that those applications that can be privately profitable are doing pretty well, and they have expanded quite a bit, but they could be doing a lot better if government policy and agency norms supported this sort of green infrastructure, soft alternatives, nature-based solutions, and adopted design standards. Where we've seen that happen, for example, in the Philippines, there is a lot more private business coming up around bioengineering and phytoremediation sort of work. However, the sort of applications that primarily deliver public goods are not doing as well. And here we're talking about, amongst others, the soil and on-farm soil and moisture conservation. And that's sort of really where we feel the lack of institutional platforms to mobilize the technology. As Dick's already pointed out, there are a lot of objectives that we pursue as international agencies, and Vetiver is very useful for and can contribute to achieving these sort of broader objectives that we have. And if we look at sort of as agencies pursue those sorts of objectives, that I'd say have a pretty good understanding and track record of how to work at the macro level with governments, with policy, strategy, creating enabling conditions, etc. And then when it comes to the project and the program scales, we also are, pretty good at that as well. But a lot of it's very process oriented and aspirational in terms of these processes are going to deliver for us better outcomes, and from the and we're good where it's sort of dealing with seed varieties and changing production calendars and things, but those in and of themselves are not dealing with soil health. They're not dealing with soil degradation for the most part. So when we get down to the community and the household and the resource manager level, because I think, we often make the mistake that we think we're managing natural resources or managing landscapes. You're not going to get there. It's you need to manage people, and it's the people that make management decisions every day that are the ones that you have to reach. And the agencies that we rely on then to deliver at the field level and at that micro scale oftentimes usually have a very limited offering of what they can offer to the farmers. And we've certainly learned that as you move up into the uplands, the lowland approach to input-driven agricultural development does not work. So that limited offering doesn't scale or move up. And the capacity for outreach is very limited, and of course the cost of having someone with a bachelor's degree go off to a village that it takes 3 days to get to is not sustainable. And there's also a limited capacity for innovation. And I think, too often when we think about innovation, particularly in the projects and programs that we finance as multilaterals, what is defined as innovation is defined from the perspective of our somewhat jaded and sophisticated peer reviewers. Whereas innovation, the important innovation, is what's seen as innovative by the end users. So we need to understand what is the capacity at the local level and what is the end user perspective on need. And that's very hyper local. But as we've seen with Vetiver, there's a lot of capacity locally to pick up these ideas and move them forward. And I'd also that as our current sort of approach to rural development, agriculture, poverty reduction becomes more and more sort of market-based approaches to poverty reduction with value chains and others, and how markets leverage this. That the rain-fed smallholders and the more remote farming communities, those that don't have the asset base that's necessary in order to participate in a market system, are getting left behind. And we don't really have that much for them. So this question of having some specific tools that communities can self-manage and sustain without expensive, limited supporting bureaucratic and technical infrastructure is an important one. And we think Vetiver is one of those specific tools. So this question about getting to scale and capitalizing on, sort of how far you can get with social media, and now trying to make those links with the institutional platforms, is that I think it's important that we become a little more humble in what we discuss as innovation, and spend less time sort of pleasing our peer reviewers with something that's innovative, and spend more time in thinking of what's innovative and needed by the end user. You increase the capacity for innovation by actively looking for it and recognizing it when you see it. And that's where social media, again, offers, a good window potentially into what is going on out there in the field, and for communicating with end users, and then creating the backward linkages that are necessary in order that institutions, that bottom up can actually link with the top down. And that, I think, requires maybe rethinking sometimes how we approach this. We think of implementation as, well, we know what to do, let's go do it, when actually what you really need is a much more structured learning approach if you want to embed something and get it to scale and learn from that experience and from the field. And we need to incentivize and reward that sort of bottom-up learning and its linkage into the institutional platforms. Clearly, studying success is a very important part of this. And again, the social media can be a very good window into what's being successful, particularly if we encourage more and more of that kind of linkage between farming communities and farming groups. Dick showed you the example from Vietnam. That we're extremely impressed with that, and that's all self-motivated. And in very few years, this fellow's got, I think it's 3,800 people right now, and they're very active, contributing their innovations and thoughts, and spreading the work. So I'm going to turn this over to Dick now to finalize with one last thought.
Okay, let me get over there. Share. Well, okay, put it up. Well, I think my last thought, I started off in, my first job I ever had was sitting in an equivalent of a DC-3, taking aerial photographs across East Africa. And I've always been interested in photographic imagery since then, satellite stuff and so on. And the other day I was looking at some photos of Nigeria, and having worked there 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and looking at it today, I can tell you not much has changed, and it's disappointing, but it also infers the challenge to what we've got to do in the future, and we don't have much time to do it. So this rapid upscaling is important. Jim talked quite a lot about it, and I've just set out a few points here which you can read. But there are two things which really are terribly important, and I think we're not doing enough about it. We being the development community, governments, and so on. One is information and publications and communications with people, the people who are going to use it. I remember once in China, I was talking to a citrus farmer back in the Jiangxi province or somewhere there. And I was sitting in his house, and I said to him, "Where did you get your extension information from? You get extension workers coming here?" He said, "No, never," he said. Well, I said, "Well, where do you get it from?" He said, "Well, you see that book underneath my chair?" The leg of his chair was a bit short. He propped it up with a book. I said, "Well, what is it?" He pulled it out, and it was a manual on citrus growing. And it turned out the government had put out over 1 million of these books to Chinese farmers. So it always remained well in my mind about communication there. And then I've been involved with a WhatsApp group in Tanzania. And I can tell you, they're just yearning for information. You put any idea into them, and if it's a good idea, they'll use it. And so we need to really do a better job at communicating with people. The other thing is technical competence and quality control. If we're going to put out these technologies, even some of the simple ones, it's got to be put out properly and technically correct, because if it's not, people try it and it doesn't work, they throw it away. And quality control, it means when something is put in place and it's good, you need people to go out there occasionally to make sure that it continues to be good. So I think those are the main points I have. And the last thing I'd said, recently reading The Economist, there was an article about, I can't remember what it was about now, but they said there was too much grand design and not enough thoughts about the village pump, the bottom where it all has to work. And I'll finish at that. Thank you.